What happens when a talk show host decides to attack Hollywood royalty, a man whose family has been making movies since before television existed, and discovers that the son of Kirk Douglas inherited more than just his famous name? What you're about to witness is one of the most satisfying reversals ever captured on daytime television. The moment when Joy Behar attempted to tear down Michael Douglas, piece by piece, and found herself facing the same steely intelligence that had made Gordon Gekko an icon. The View studio didn't just go quiet, it watched in stunned amazement as one of the most decorated actors in Hollywood history systematically dismantled every attack with the precision of a surgeon. And for the first time in the show's history, it wasn't the guest who walked off the stage. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments because this confrontation will show you exactly why Michael Douglas has survived and thrived for over 50 years in the most unforgiving industry in the world. The View studio carried a different energy that Wednesday morning. Word had spread that Michael Douglas was the guest, and there was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. This wasn't just another celebrity interview, this was Hollywood royalty, a man whose father had been a legend and who had carved out his own legendary career in the shadow of that enormous legacy. When Michael Douglas walked onto the set, the applause was immediate and sustained. At 80 years old, he moved with the careful elegance of a man who had learned that presence mattered more than speed. There was something almost regal about him, the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove but plenty still to say. He settled into the guest chair with the practiced ease of someone who had done thousands of interviews over half a century. His smile was warm but watchful, the smile of a man who had learned that not every friendly face had friendly intentions. Whoopi greeted him with genuine warmth and respect. Sarah Haynes seemed slightly awed. The audience was captivated, as audiences always were, by the presence of someone who had been famous longer than many of them had been alive. Joy Behar, however, sat in her chair with that familiar expression, the one that suggested she had decided this interview was going to be memorable, though perhaps not in the way her guest expected. "Michael Douglas, welcome to The View," Whoopi began. "What an honor to have you here. We want to talk about your incredible career, your family legacy, everything you've contributed to cinema." "Thank you, Whoopi," Michael replied, his voice carrying that distinctive smooth quality that had seduced audiences for decades. "It's a pleasure to be here. I've always admired what you do on this show." Then Joy leaned forward, and the atmosphere shifted immediately. "So, Michael, let's get into something real," Joy said, her voice carrying an edge that made the other hosts exchange glances. "You've had this incredible career, won Oscars, made iconic films. But let's be honest, you're Kirk Douglas's son. You grew up in Hollywood royalty. Some people would say you had every advantage handed to you on a silver platter. How much of your success is actually yours, and how much is just the accident of your birth?" The question was clearly designed to diminish his entire career in a single stroke. The studio fell quiet. But Michael simply tilted his head slightly, studying Joy with an expression that was almost amused. "That's an interesting opening question, Joy. Most people wait until at least the second question to suggest my entire career is illegitimate." His smile didn't waver. "But let me address it directly. Yes, my father was Kirk Douglas. Yes, I grew up around the film industry. But if you think that guarantees success in Hollywood, you don't understand Hollywood very well." "But surely the doors were open for you in ways they weren't for others," Joy pressed. "The connections, the name recognition, the access to funding. You can't pretend you started from nowhere." "I've never pretended that," Michael replied calmly. "But let me tell you something about being the son of a legend. Every project you do gets compared to your father's work. Every success is attributed to his influence. Every failure is proof that you don't have his talent. You carry a name that opens some doors and closes others. Some people will never take you seriously because they've already decided you're just riding coattails." He leaned forward slightly, his famous blue eyes fixed on Joy. "I produced One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest when I was 29 years old. It won Best Picture. Do you know how many producers have won that award before 30? Do you know how many sons of famous actors have achieved that? I didn't inherit that Oscar, Joy. I earned it. He paused, letting that sink in. And then I went on to win another Oscar for acting for Wall Street. I created Gordon Gekko, a character that defined an era. I made films that are still studied in film schools today. Romancing the Stone, The American President, Wonder Boys, Traffic, Behind the Candelabra. That's not coattail riding, Joy. That's a career. His voice carried quiet pride. My father was one of the greatest actors who ever lived. Spartacus, Paths of Glory, Champion. He was a giant. And yes, I grew up in his shadow, but I stepped out of that shadow through decades of work, through taking risks, through choosing projects that challenged me rather than just paid well. If you can't see that, it says more about your willingness to look than about my accomplishments. Joy seemed momentarily taken aback by the directness, but she recovered quickly. Let's talk about your personal life then. You've been married to Catherine Zeta-Jones for over 20 years. There's a 25-year age gap between you. Some people have always questioned whether that relationship was about love or about other considerations. The implication was clear and clearly intended to wound. But Michael laughed, a genuine, warm laugh that seemed to fill the studio. Joy, do you know how many times I've been asked about the age gap? Hundreds, maybe thousands. And my answer is always the same. Catherine and I fell in love. We've built a life together. We've raised 2 wonderful children. We've survived my cancer diagnosis together. We've been through everything couples go through. And we're still together, still in love, still committed. His voice softened slightly. The age gap thing says more about the people asking than it does about us. Love doesn't check birth certificates. Connection doesn't calculate years. We found each other at exactly the right time in both our lives, and we've been making it work ever since. If that bothers some people, that's their problem, not mine. He smiled, and for a moment, his entire demeanor changed to something warmer. You want to know what our relationship is really like? We laugh together every day. We support each other's careers without jealousy or competition. We've raised 2 children who are grounded and kind despite growing up in Hollywood. We've been through my cancer together, through career ups and downs, through all the things that break most couples. And we're still here, still in love, still grateful for each other. But don't you think it sends a message about older men and younger women in Hollywood? Joy pushed. About the power dynamics involved? What message would that be? Michael asked, his voice taking on a sharper edge. That 2 adults can fall in love regardless of age? That a relationship can work if both people are committed to it? Catherine is one of the most accomplished women I've ever known. An Oscar winner herself, a mother, a businesswoman. Suggesting that she's somehow a victim of power dynamics is insulting to her, not to me. He shook his head slowly. I find it fascinating that when an older man is with a younger woman, it's always questioned. But somehow that questioning is supposed to be feminist. Catherine doesn't need your protection, Joy. She's perfectly capable of making her own choices. And she chose me. I consider myself the lucky one in that equation. Joy's face had reddened slightly, but she pressed on. Let's talk about your son, Cameron, then. He had very public struggles with drug addiction. He went to prison. Some might say that reflects on your parenting, that while you were building your career, your son was falling apart. The studio went very quiet. This was personal territory, painful territory. But Michael's expression didn't crumble. Instead, something harder settled into his features. I expected you to go there, he said quietly. People always do when they're running out of legitimate things to criticize. Let me tell you about my son. His voice was controlled, but carried an undercurrent of steel. Cameron struggled with addiction. He made terrible choices. He went to prison. All of that is true. It's also true that I wasn't always the father I should have been when he was young. I was building a career, and I wasn't present enough. I've acknowledged that publicly. I've made amends for it. Cameron and I have a relationship now that we didn't have before. He looked directly at Joy. But here's what you're missing, Joy. Cameron's story isn't over. He served his time. He got clean. He rebuilt his life. He wrote a book about his experiences to help other people struggling with addiction. He's a father now himself. His story is one of redemption, not failure. And I'm proud of him, not in spite of what he went through, but because of how he came through it. His voice rose slightly. Every family has struggles. Every parent makes mistakes. The measure isn't whether you're perfect, because no one is. The measure is whether you keep showing up, keep trying to do better, keep loving your children even when it's hard. I've done that, and I'll put my relationship with my son up against anyone's. Joy tried to shift angles. What about your cancer diagnosis? You initially blamed it on oral sex, which many people found shocking and irresponsible. That's not accurate, Michael said firmly. I was asked about the causes of throat cancer in an interview, and I mentioned that HPV, which can be transmitted through oral sex, was a factor in many cases. I was trying to raise awareness about a real health issue. The media spun it into something sensational, as the media often does. He gestured around the studio. You know what's irresponsible? Using someone's cancer diagnosis as ammunition in an interview. I beat stage 4 throat cancer, Joy. I went through radiation and chemotherapy. I couldn't eat solid food for months. I lost 30 pounds. I wasn't sure I'd ever work again, or speak properly again, or be able to taste food again. His voice cracked slightly, but held. And I survived. I came back. I've done some of the best work of my career since then. Ant-Man, the Kaminsky Method. Work that showed I still had something to offer, that the cancer hadn't taken my talent or my passion. He looked around the studio. Do you know what stage 4 throat cancer survival rates were when I was diagnosed? Not good. The doctors were cautious in their optimism. My family was terrified. I was terrified. But I fought. I did every treatment. I showed up every day. And when it was over, when I was declared cancer-free, I made a promise to myself that I would never take another day for granted. His voice cracked slightly, but held. That's not something to be used as a weapon against me. That's something to be celebrated. That's hope for everyone watching who's going through their own health battles. If I can survive stage 4 cancer at my age and come back stronger, anyone can fight through whatever they're facing. Joy seemed to sense she was losing control of the interview, and she made one more attempt. Fine. Let's talk about your films then. Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct, Disclosure. You made a career playing men who were either victimized by women or victimizing them. Some would say those films were deeply misogynistic, that you profited from portraying women as dangerous, unstable, predatory. Michael laughed again, but this time there was an edge to it. Now you're going after my filmography? Let me understand your argument. I played characters in films that explored complex gender dynamics, and that makes me responsible for misogyny? By that logic, Anthony Hopkins is responsible for cannibalism because he played Hannibal Lecter. He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease now. Fatal Attraction was about the consequences of infidelity. Basic Instinct was a psychological thriller that became a cultural phenomenon. Disclosure was actually about a man being sexually harassed by a woman, which was groundbreaking at the time and started conversations that are still relevant today. These were films that sparked conversation, that challenged audiences, that explored territory other filmmakers were afraid to touch. He crossed his legs, settling into professor mode. You know what's interesting about those films? They gave women some of the most memorable roles in cinema history. Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction, Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct, Demi Moore in Disclosure. These weren't weak female characters. These were powerful, complex, dangerous women. The fact that powerful women make some people uncomfortable isn't misogyny. It's reality. His voice took on a harder edge. But here's what I find most interesting about your question, Joy. You've spent this entire interview questioning my legitimacy as an artist, my relationships, my parenting, my health, and my filmography. You've thrown everything you could find at me, hoping something would stick, and when nothing did, you've moved on to the next attack. He looked around the studio, then back at Joy. Do you know what that reminds me of? Gordon Gekko, the character I played in Wall Street. He said greed is good, but he also said information is power. And what you've been doing here is using information and misinformation as a weapon, trying to tear down instead of understand, attacking instead of engaging. He smiled, but it was the smile of Gordon Gekko, cold and knowing. The difference is, Gekko was fictional. You're real, and you're doing this to a real person who came here in good faith to have a conversation about his life and work. That says something about you, Joy, something very flattering. Joy stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by you about ethics. Aren't you, though? Michael remained seated, perfectly calm, because that's exactly what you've been doing to me for the last 15 minutes. Lecturing me about my family, my relationships, my choices. The difference is, I've answered your questions with honesty and patience. You're responding to mine by running away. The observation was devastating in its simplicity. Joy's face was now fully red. This interview is over. I agree, Michael said pleasantly. Though I'd say it ended when you decided it was going to be an attack rather than a conversation. Everything since then has just been me defending myself against someone who came to this table with a predetermined narrative. He stood up, but only to adjust his jacket before sitting back down. I'm not leaving, Joy. I came here to talk about my career, my family, my life. I'm happy to do that with your colleagues if you're not interested, but I'm not going to let you claim some kind of victory by walking off and pretending I said something that justified it. Joy stood frozen for a moment, clearly unsure how to proceed. Michael continued, his voice almost kind. You know, Joy, I've been in this industry for over 50 years. I've dealt with critics, with tabloids, with people who wanted to tear me down for every reason imaginable. And what I've learned is that the people who attack others usually have something they're unhappy about in themselves. He looked at her with something that might have been compassion. I don't know what that is for you, but I hope you find peace with it, because this constant need to diminish others, it doesn't actually make you feel better. It just makes the world a little smaller, a little meaner, a little less generous. Joy turned and walked off the set without another word, leaving behind a studio that seemed to vibrate with the aftermath of what had just occurred. The audience sat in stunned silence, then began to applaud. Not the polite applause of a television show, but genuine appreciation for what they had witnessed. Michael turned to Whoopi with a gentle smile. Well, that was unexpected. I'm sorry if I caused any problems. Whoopi shook her head, clearly moved by what she had seen. You didn't cause anything, Michael. You just refused to be diminished. That's not a problem. That's a lesson. Sarah Haynes leaned forward. Can I ask you something? After all of that, after decades of this kind of scrutiny, how do you maintain your grace? Michael considered the question carefully before answering. You learn that the attacks say more about the attacker than they do about you. You learn that your worth isn't determined by what other people think or say. You learn that the best revenge is living well, doing good work, loving your family, and waking up every day grateful for the life you've built. He looked at the audience. To everyone watching who has ever felt like they had to defend their entire existence to people who don't deserve explanations, you don't. You know your truth. You know your journey. And the people who matter, the people who really love you, they know it too. Everyone else is just noise, he smiled. And this time it was the warm smile of Michael Douglas, not the cold smile of Gordon Gekko. I've been blessed beyond measure. A father who taught me everything about this business. A wife who makes every day worth living. Children who have grown into people I admire. A career that has challenged me and rewarded me in equal measure. And the health to still be here, still working, still loving this craft. He straightened his jacket one final time. That's my life, Joy, wherever you are. Not perfect, but mine, and I'm proud of every bit of it. The audience rose to their feet in applause that seemed to go on forever. They hadn't just watched a celebrity interview. They had watched a masterclass in grace under fire, in refusing to be diminished, in responding to attacks with intelligence rather than anger. For those who had grown up watching him seduce audiences as a leading man, who had been thrilled by his villains and moved by his dramatic turns, who had followed his health battles and celebrated his recovery, there was something deeply satisfying about watching him refuse to be reduced to tabloid fodder. Michael Douglas had spent 50 years proving himself, and he wasn't about to let a talk show host undo that work in 15 minutes. That was the real lesson of that morning. Not about celebrity or family legacy or Hollywood power dynamics, but about the simple, powerful act of knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. Michael Douglas had learned that lesson from his legendary father, had tested it through decades of his own career, and had demonstrated it with a grace that his critics would never understand, but his fans would never forget. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Did Joy Behar get what she deserved, or was Michael Douglas too harsh? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.